Welcome to By the Numbers. Now, this informational program is designed to help the residents of Whitman and Hanson better understand what it takes to be able to finance town departments, to fund education, even how the state puts together its fiscal year budget to better serve the Commonwealth. The mission of the show is to speak with various local stakeholders and hear their perspective and their concerns on their community's financial picture. Now, today we have a very special guest. He is a former Hanson Selectman, but he has served in town government for my understanding a little over 40 years. We have Mr. Bruce Young. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you, Kevin. It's always great to be here.
How are you doing?
Great, great. As soon as I walk through that door, it's like stepping back into history.
Really? Like you
yes.
teleported back in time?
Yes, exactly.
Well, now you kind of wear the title of citizen activist, but again, not too long ago, you were a Hanson Selectman. I believe you ran 3 times and were successful.
3 non-consecutive terms, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
What made you want to hold office in the first place?
Well, I thought I had a great deal to offer the town. I've been an accountant and corporate controller for 34 years, so I've got a mind for numbers. It makes me like a triple threat. And I'm a stickler for detail. I'm the guy that people always used to ask to take the complex subject and turn it into a summarized subject that people can understand. I did that at work, and I did that for many years in the town.
So you must be excited by the name of the show, By the Numbers.
By the Numbers, yes. It's right up my alley.
Sometimes it's been fondly called On the Numbers because it's about numbers itself. What are some of the other boards and committees that you've had the privilege to serve on?
Well, believe it or not, since you brought the subject up, in the early 1980s, I was the chairman of the Finance Committee. I got to be the chairman of the Finance Committee at a very unique time, because in 1980, when Ronald Reagan was elected president, that same year, guess what happened in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts?
Prop 2.5 law.
Prop 2.5 came in, and it changed the aspect of financial pictures in every town in the Commonwealth, because it put restrictions on the amount of property tax that people could be taxed in the Commonwealth. Right. And it also eliminated school committee autonomy. Because back before Proposition 2.5, and Proposition 2.5 came in fiscal 1982, the first time, before that time, the school committee could vote anything it wanted and assess to the town and present a budget, and there wasn't anything the town meeting could do about it. If the town meeting didn't go along with it, you could be sued by the Department of Education, and the budget would be reinstated. So not only did it put a restriction on and a cap of 2.5% of the prior year's tax levy on property tax, but it also eliminated school committee autonomy.
What do you feel are the basics to municipal budgeting?
Well, you always have to take a conservative approach to budgeting. You have to engage in zero-based budgeting and prove everything that's in the budget. And that's basically the way I see Hanson doing it. They're very detailed, right down to the finite line and what's in your labor line, what's in your expense line, all the way down to the minute expenses, and prove to me that you actually need that, okay?
Do most communities do that, though? Is that a practice? Is that a common practice, or is that just in certain cases? Because it's funny you mention about Hanson doing it, because we have had conversations with Dan Salvucci, who is a liaison to the South Shore VOTEC, their school committee, and their superintendent director, Dr. Tom Hickey, is one who normally, when he puts forth the budget, one of the first things he says is that the budget was built on zero-based budgeting. Yes. It wasn't a matter of just adding on top like it's frosting. It's a matter of you need to prove every dollar from ground zero.
And Kevin, that works as long as you have a town administrator and a finance committee working that way, because the finance committee is supposed to represent the town meeting, and every single article and every single line item in that budget comes before the finance committee, who, if they're doing their job correctly, is supposed to scrutinize that line, not just the line from last year and what the line is this year, but what's within that line, okay? and prove it, okay? And if they're doing their job correctly, then the taxpayers can take it easy a little bit because they know that the Finance Committee is doing their job. If the Finance Committee isn't doing their job, then that can be a problem in the town.
What was it like the first couple of years dealing with this new law that was on the books where you could only tax so much that the school committee, there was a certain autonomy? Talk to me, what was it like trying to hit your stride when it came to putting forth an annual budget?
Well, we wanted to be fair to every single department. So the first 2 years, every single department had to take a hit. And then after that,
Just a financial hit, or are we talking about as far as losing personnel?
no, it would just take some sort of financial hit,
Okay.
you know. And of course, that's when the word prioritize came in and was used quite a bit, because you had to prioritize your expenses. You certainly didn't want to cut the police department and fund the entire recreation budget, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
We were forced to cut out our recreation budget, and we were forced to cut out our communications department, and then let the police and fire handle that in order to save safety personnel at the expense of communication. So we eliminated the entire communication budget. I remember those first 2 years.
Wow. Tough times.
Yes, it was tough times.
But you were able to make it through.
We did, and we cut up. We had 30% to cut, and we did it all in 1 year.
How do you feel that you're looking back, nearly 40 years, and looking to today? How do you feel that things have changed? Do you think things have changed for the better? Do you feel that there's still a struggle when it comes to putting together financial budgets and being able to prioritize?
There's a struggle now only because of one thing, and that's when the town went to total regionalization, we were promised about a 70% reimbursement from the state. That was one of the reasons why the two towns went for total regionalization, because there were some things that we had to cut out of our budget until we got into total regionalization.
Mm-hmm.
We saved so much money, and we had so much more money coming in for the state. We were able to put a lot of things back into the budget that we had cut out. You know, we had a highway department that was operating with almost no personnel at one time. We were able to add those men back into the highway department and put a few more people on in various departments where they were cut out, and even reestablish a communications department for a time. And because we were saving so much money from taxation, because we had more money coming into the state government and that 70% reimbursement. Now that entire thing has turned around, because with that equalized education law, we don't get the 70% anymore. And over the last 10 years, that 70% coming back to the Rutland Regional School District has been going down and down and down. And so they've been turning to the towns to fund more and more of the schools through their assessment to the two towns. For example, in the last 3 years, and I got the figures here, in Hanson, for example, the increase in the assessment from the regional school system has gone up 3%, then it went up almost 6%, and then last year it was between 8 and 9%. So, and we're talking quite a bit of money there. There was $700,000 or $800,000 last year just for your increase in the assessment to the school system.
Right.
And when you're dealing with a $24 million budget, that's a lot of money. I think last year the town administrator told the schools, he says, we can do it this year, and we almost exhausted all of the money we had in free cash to do it. That this is unsustainable. We can't do this for another year. So, and Whitman was even worse, because last year their increase in their assessment was like 1.2 million, just for the operation, not including the transportation.
You mentioned the school district, and it's worth noting that it does take up, in most cases, unless there's a shared school district, a large portion of a municipality's annual budget. And you mentioned the last couple of budget cycles that the annual assessment has, in fact, increased. In your opinion, what needs to be done to be able to satisfy the town's annual commitment to the school district but not so much at the expense at other town department budgets?
Geez, I'm not really sure because I'm not that savvy as to what the figures look like this year. I've heard some numbers floating around,
Right.
but I can only say that I don't think it's possible that Hanson's going to be able to afford $800,000 to $850,000 again this year. Look at Whitman; it was $1.2 million. So what's the answer to that? I don't know. Somebody's got to take a real hard look at the Whitman-Hanson Regional School District budget first and see if there's some things in there that don't need to be in there. Have they actually put into that budget all the savings that they anticipated for the closing of the McQuon School? Because there's a big chunk of change right there. They closed a whole school in September of last year. So has all that been factored in? Like I said, the Finance Committee has to do their job. If they have a liaison to the school committee, they could shed some light on that. And I'm not sure what Hanson's free cash and other stabilization fund look like this year. I know stabilization fund is pretty good, and that's a figure that most people don't want to touch. That's like a rainy day fund, because if you start touching your stabilization fund, that can affect your bond rating when you go out to borrow.
And how important is a bond rating? For folks who don't know, and again, the idea of the show is to inform folks as to what goes on when it comes to taking care of whether it's capital expenses or doing various capital projects. Again, you want to have a community where you can come in and your town hall is taken care of. You have a nice building for town departments. You also want to make sure that you have a nice highway department for folks to work in and be able to provide services. And you want to make sure that, as amenities go, you have a good school system. Mm-hmm. So my question here is that what does it take financially to be able to make that happen? And do you foresee, as somebody who has so much experience, can a community like Hanson, you look at Whitman. Whitman right now is having its druthers in regards to a deficit, a sizable deficit.
Yes, I saw that.
Yeah.
You're talking about a sizable, and they're looking at a deficit even on their own general government side,
Right.
from what I understand, right? They're looking at an override that could have a
debt exclusion and override.
And then I think they even had an impact that they were looking at per household. Was it like $500 a household?
It's something in the neighborhood of, yeah.
Yeah, $500 a household.
That's another episode, though. That's another episode that we have that we will be showcasing.
And people should understand that an override, if you talk about the word override, a lot of people focus on that override figure. And of course, an override, as you know, is forever.
Unless you vote an underride.
Which is
probably has, I don't know.
If you can show me the last town that voted for an underride.
I think there has been one community, but
it's a very rare exclusion
it's
since
right, it's
1982.
It's
a total anomaly. And don't forget, an override. Let's say you vote $1 million over. Let's say you vote a $10 million override. Okay.
It's on top of your tax base.
Yes, it goes into
over.
Into your tax base. Plus, it's cumulative as far as the effect of the 2.5%. It's like compounded interest at the bank. It just keeps compounding.
Mm-hmm. So we're sitting here talking a little bit. You mentioned about a Prop 2.5 override, but it's warranted for us also to talk a little bit about a debt exclusion. Do you think folks know what a debt exclusion is and what the purpose of a debt exclusion is?
I think they have a pretty good idea. It's for capital expenses that are long term, over time, that the town has to vote for.
But what would you use a debt exclusion for?
Well, the last time the town attempted to use it was to build a $50 million school over in Hanson and tear down the Indian Head and the McQuon. That was about $50 million over 25, 30 years.
But now let's be factual with this. It was a $50 million school, but what was the commitment of the town itself? Because I believe that the Mass School Building Authority would have chipped in a certain amount of money. Correct?
Yeah, but you have to add the interest to that over time.
Okay.
And that they don't like to add the interest into it because it makes it look like you're saving Like your total, if it's a $50 million school and they say that they're chipping in $25 million, it makes it look like your commitment over that time is is only $25 million. It's not.
Right.
It's $25 million plus the interest. Because let's keep this in mind: the state does not chip in on the interest. You own all the interest.
Right.
So when you get down to it, it was still almost that total amount of money over 25 or 30 years.
But if you did but if you did a debt exclusion, that's not something that is, it's unlike
It's
a Prop
not
2.5
permanent.
override.
It goes away once it's paid off. But an override is forever.
How difficult do you think it would be in the current day era to be able to pass a Prop 2.5 override and a debt exclusion? What do you feel the odds are for that to be possible?
Debt exclusions are much easier to pass than an override for the obvious reasons. Overrides are forever. Right. And if a debt exclusion is for a very worthy project, okay, like they passed one in Whitman a few years ago to add people to the fire department?
Yeah, they added four people.
It passed. I think it passed overwhelmingly. But keep in mind, we did go through an override situation in 2016. There was a $3 million plus override proposed for the school district by the boards of selectmen. And that went down more than 2-1 in Hanson and was narrowly defeated in the town of Hanson. My experience with overrides are this: if you have an override, if an override question is proposed, and you have no active no group in that respective town,
Mm-hmm.
the override will probably pass. If you have a very active no group putting out facts and figures on why they think the override is not necessary and trying to steer people in the other direction, while you have a very active yes group also putting out information, the no group is probably going to win, because it's a pocketbook issue, and it's the more informed people become about it, the more negativity there is. All right? So the overrides that have passed in the town of Hanson have usually passed because there is no active opposition to it. We've had a few overrides that have passed in the town of Hanson. We had a very active no group in the town of Hanson in 2016, so much so that with all the input on social media and everything, it spilled over enough into the town of Whitman, so the town of Whitman defeated their portion of it as well.
But wasn't there an override for technology needs for the school? And I believe that it was at the cost of $600,000 to Hanson residents.
That was a debt exclusion, not an override.
Okay.
That was a capital item.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit, delving more into budgets and talking about transparency.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that there's enough transparency when it comes to a municipal budget compared to a school district's budget? Is there enough transparency with the numbers and the process?
No, there isn't. I'll tell you why.
Why?
Back when I was on the finance committee, back in the old days, okay, we used to have 3 newspapers in the town. And what committee did they always cover?
Finance.
They covered the finance committee. Now in the town of Hanson, no reporters cover. In fact, there's only one newspaper left in the town of Hanson, and that's a weekly. So you don't have anybody competing for news. You have one newspaper, and they don't go to the finance committee meetings. They go to the board of selectmen's meetings. The action is over at the finance committee when they're reviewing every single article in the town meeting warrant and every single budget. So nothing is getting reported of what's going on in that finance committee. And as I told you, the finance committee line is the line that's voted for at the town meeting. What could be more important than that? They give a recommendation on every single line and what they feel is in the best interest of the taxpayers and the citizens in the town of Hanson, and those are the numbers that you vote on. And how they're coming up with those numbers, that's all going on at every finance committee meeting. And nobody sees it. Look at the press coverage. When was the last time you saw a press coverage for a finance committee meeting in the town of Hanson? 0, none. When was the last time you saw a program on Whitman Hanson Cable Access of a Hanson Finance Committee meeting? Have you ever seen one? I haven't.
But that if you wanted to be a videographer, and if the chairman of the Hanson,
Why is it up to me?
it's not up to you. I'm just saying though, is if a resident wanted to sign out a camera and cover those meetings. Again, we have a very small staff here. Not to get into our semantics here, but the idea here is that in the 15 years that I've been here, it's been near and far as to those meetings being covered, whether it's in Whitman or Hanson.
How much time do we have?
Why?
Because I like to give people, because I was on the Board of Selectmen and I know things that other people don't know about budgets, there's a few things people should know that I know that people never talk about.
Okay, give us the top three. Number three.
Group health insurance, retirement plans, and what's the third one? But if we start talking about group insurance, I'll tell you why.
What about other post-employment benefits?
Oh yes,
OPEB.
OPEBs. I'm sorry.
OPEB.
OPEBs.
Yeah.
OPEBs. Okay. But let's start with group insurance, for example. Okay. Well, people don't realize that in the town of Hanson, back when regionalization took place.
We're talking like the 90s or the 50s?
This is when total regionalization went into effect. Was that in the
when was that?
1990s, I believe?
You would know better than I would.
I think so. Prior to that, Hanson was contributing to their group insurance for group insurance members, for health insurance employees, the state minimum, which was 50%. Under the state law, municipalities have to contribute 50%. Somehow, Hanson ended up paying 80 to 90% for their contribution to health insurance. So Hanson currently pays for their current employees 80% of a family plan, and 90% for singles, okay? Plus, because a lot of these people are union members, and because union members, you have to give the regular employees who aren't union the same benefits as the other one. Everybody is at 80-90, or 80-90. So, but keep in mind this, in a municipality and a union municipality, which most municipalities are, if you have somebody retire in the Plymouth County pension plan, and let's say somebody retires at age 56, and they've got 9 years to go before they retire, when they go out the door, they can take their health insurance with them, and the town continues to pay that 80 or 90% for the next 9 years, okay?
Isn't it like that for most municipalities?
Yes. Well, this is what I'm saying, because a lot of people that work for the private sector, they don't get that. They go out the door, and they go on COBRA for a year and a half, and on that, for that year and a half, they have to pay 102% of the employees, whatever the employer is being charged. So you continue to pay the 80 to 90% of that for that retired employee, plus you're hiring another employee to come in, which now you're paying 75 to 65%, depending on whether it's a family plan or a single plan. All right, so it's like a double whammy.
So what are you proposing then? So what are you proposing?
I'm just telling you that's why there's a problem with the group insurance. When you see the Whitman-Hanson Regional School Committee say, we have a problem because our group insurance costs are going through the rocks. The increase in the rates are one thing. The increase, what I just told you, is another. Do you realize that the Whitman-Hanson Regional School District, you have almost over 800 members in their plan. And of those 800 members, you have a little over 400 who are active employees and a little over 400 who are retired employees.
Right.
All right? That doesn't happen in private industry. All right? It doesn't happen if you're self-employed.
Right.
But that's why there's a problem with group insurance. So if people don't know what the problem is with the problem with group insurance, there it is right there.
And you feel
and there's no way around it.
And you think this is on all levels, that maybe we're dealing with it on the state level as well? Do you feel that the state also deals with it?
I shouldn't single out the regional high school. You get the same problem in the town.
Municipal level?
And at the municipal level.
Okay.
It's the same thing happens there. But that's something that I know that not too many people know. Did you know that?
I did know that, yeah.
All right, but
here's the thing, and you could speak from experience. You are a retired gentleman.
Yes.
You're retired from the private sector.
Correct.
So you could speak from experience.
Yes,
See,
I
it's a
speak from
win-win.
experience.
It's a win, but this is good. This is for someone
And
to point this
and
out.
when I left my job early, I had to pay like $1,500 a month for COBRA until I found another job who had a health insurance plan. Okay.
Again, you are watching by the numbers, and I think this seems like to be a familiar statement I make towards the near end of our programs. Is that the formula is to try to do a 30-minute program, but when we're going along and having such a good conversation, I like to be able to stretch out the time and allow for our guests, whoever they may be, to fully finish our conversation here. So that will be the case today, is to
Yes.
continue talking. And I want to kind of stick with we kind of went off track just a bit here, because we were talking about transparency, the importance of transparency when it comes to the budgeting process. And we can kind of delve back in.
Well, there's a lot of negotiation that goes on that people never see.
A lot of give and take, I would think that's what
There's a lot of
negotiating is.
negotiating behind the scenes that people never realize takes place in a municipality. You have the business manager, you have the chairman of the school committee, and the superintendent negotiating with both towns. Nobody ever sees that. It takes place on a weekday, usually in the morning or afternoon. They set up a meeting. How much money can you give us, can you squeeze out of it for the region this year? So there's a lot of give and take that goes on behind the scenes that people never see. That's non-transparent.
And you yourself, you have a chance to sit in on those meetings and be a part of them?
I haven't personally, but I know they take place.
Is it, this from having conversations with your town
Yes.
administrator? Okay.
Yeah.
And what is usually, is it a matter of, is it all the things that we've talked about here, not only the annual assessment, the annual assessment to the town, but also helping them in regards to healthcare? Is healthcare a part of that?
How can they help out on
I'm
healthcare?
talking about, if there's some kind of a group rate that they're getting through,
I'm sure
the
that
Plymouth County,
if
or,
they're in the Mayflower group, which I assume that the region is a region in the Mayflower group, I'm not sure if
Yep.
they are. That's the reason they're in there, because they're getting the best bang for the buck, because they're in with a myriad, a consortium of municipalities that are located in the Mayflower group, and that's the reason they're in there.
You had talked about with Prop with Prop 2.5 coming in the 80s, it changed as to how the school committee was able to negotiate, put something in place at the expense of the taxpayer.
Yes.
But these days, when it comes to the schools, when it comes to the school committees and their people negotiating contracts, how often do we have a selectman from that community? Let's say maybe you have a liaison from the Hanson Board of Selectmen and Whitman Board of Selectmen being a part of those discussions. Does that happen, or is it the school negotiates the contract with the teacher union?
That's very interesting that you say that, because under the state law, there is supposed to be a liaison from the towns that get to review what the school committee has put together as far as
Contract.
their contracts. And it's up to the school committee to decide whether they want that liaison in on the negotiations. For some reason, this school committee has never allowed that particular individual from the two towns in on the negotiations. That person only is allowed to come in at the last minute, and it's atrocious what I've seen. And I insisted. I says, I want to see the the contract ahead of time, because I just don't want one of our members of the Board of Selectmen to have to go over there and then just rubber stamp something that they don't know anything about. So at least supply us with a copy of the proposed contract, or the supposed changes in the contract, before a person goes over there. Otherwise, you're acting like a rubber stamp. It's like, what's the purpose of the law? The purpose of the law is to have some people there who are not immediate stakeholders, like school committee members, passing judgment on this contract and whether it's fair to the teachers and fair to the taxpayers of the respective communities. So that's why, if you want to add a little bit more transparency to that process, have the school committee vote to allow that liaison to participate in the negotiations. Why shouldn't that person be in on the negotiations? What's the deep, dark secret that somebody's hiding over there?
Well, I asked that question because I've heard it been put forth before, is that school committees, and I'm not necessarily just talking about the Whitman-Hanson School
Right.
District, but you hear a lot of times that school committees will negotiate contracts with various unions at the expense of the municipal budget, that it's something that's going to be incurred on the taxpayer, and that you don't necessarily have the municipal government as part of the conversation. So
And exactly, and that's why
I'm
the,
asking
the,
that.
the Department of Secondary, Elementary and Secondary Education would like to see that as part of it, so you have that type of transparency happening.
As a taxpayer yourself, do you feel the town has the type of leadership that if in fact down the road Hanson has a financial crisis, that they will be able to solve and resolve any said fiscal problems? Does it have the leadership? And that's not only on your municipal boards, but also on your school boards.
You have to have, what's the word, diversity? I think you have to have, as far as political thinking, on one side of the coin or the other,
Okay.
progressive and conservative. I think you need to have a good balance so you get all the ideas heard, okay? And my bugaboo is this. One person in the community should not be able to appoint all 7 members of the Finance Committee. And the reason for this is, and I'm not saying that it happens,
But it might.
But it might,
it
and
might.
believe me, in the past, it does. If you've got somebody who's the moderator in a town, who presides over the town meeting, who's by law gets to appoint all 7 members of the Finance Committee, who makes those important decisions on what they feel is the recommendations are going to be to town meeting that they feel are in the best interest of the town, and they stack it with all conservatives because they happen to be conservative, or they stack it with all progressives because they happen to be a progressive, that is not a good thing for the town, okay? You need a melding of ideas coming in. If everybody thinks alike, then nobody's thinking.
Okay.
That's my philosophy. So I've seen it happen, and I'll give you an example.
I like examples. Go ahead.
I walk into the Hanson Finance Committee meeting last year, all right? And I know they haven't voted on the 8 to 9% increase in the Whitman-Hanson Regional School Assessment. And I'm there for one reason, because I have an article that's coming up on the recall law. If you know that they changed the recall law that took rights away from basically watered down the rights in Hanson of the recall law to the point where nobody may ever be recalled again, regardless of seriousness of what they've done. And I went in there because I hadn't voted on it to try to get them to see it my way, because they were going to be voting on that recommendation. And at the same time, they hadn't voted on the assessment to the town. They spent about 20 minutes to a half an hour debating on whether they should appropriate, I forget what it was, $8,000 to $10,000 for a new water wheel for the Nathaniel Thomas Mill, which was part of the bicentennial project back in 1976, in the historic Nathaniel Thomas Mill. And the town administrator, so they sent somebody down to the town administrator's office to find out if what was going on with the funding the assessment for the Whitman-Hanson Regional School Committee, $700,000 or $800,000. They came back after they spent 20 minutes deciding that they weren't going to recommend the new water wheel for the mill. They came back and they passed by acclamation with no debate the 8 or 9% increase for the Whitman-Hanson Regional School District. With no debate. No talk about if it was anything in the budget that they felt could be minimized or cut, or savings or anything. They passed it. That's not good. No discussion.
Do you feel that maybe the folks who were sitting on that committee felt as though they really didn't have anything additional to add?
Additional
Is that possible?
Additional to what?
To the particular item.
You know how big the school budget is? We're talking about $50 million. You know
I'm
how many lines there are in the school budget?
I'm sure there are more than we could count right now. What would you say? Would you say 400, 500, 600 line items?
I don't know. There's a lot of
All right,
lines.
40 years, you should know how many
There's a
there are.
lot of
All right.
lines, my friend, a lot of lines.
Okay.
Okay? At least give me a little bit of discussion.
Well, maybe somebody who's watching will give you further discussion down the road, knowing that you'd like to see a little bit of back and forth about.
I think you need coverage on, I think you need, if there isn't diversity on the finance committee in either town, if it's too one-sided, that's not a good thing. Like I said, if everybody's thinking the same way, then nobody's thinking.
It's a good point. It's a very good point.
It's one of the most important, underrated committees in town, and yet look at the law and see what the responsibilities of the finance committee is.
I'm about to ask you another question, which I already very well know the answer to, but I want you to be able to kind of expand upon it. And it's a popular question that I asked towards the end of the program, and that is about social media. Give me your thoughts on social media. Does social media help or hurt when it comes to providing information about what's going on with a municipal budget or even with a school budget? Do you feel that it helps or hurts budget issues?
It can do both, but the as you know,
I do know.
As
I know you have you
As
are
you-
somebody who likes to have full conversations with folks, and you are not inhibited in giving a response to somebody and going back and forth because you feel that debate is healthy, and there's nothing wrong with that.
yes, and debate is healthy.
It's very healthy. But how much is too much debate?
There can be too much debate. The power with social media, it gives certain people power that shouldn't have power.
You think so?
I don't know how else to say it. Okay, it gives everybody. It gives everybody from the guy who has the most vast knowledge of municipal government in the world, and can run circles around anybody who found his knowledge about detail and how things work. And it gives equal power to the guy sitting down who's unemployed, a total loser in life, and sitting down in his grandmother's cellar playing video games. He goes on and he starts name calling, he starts making up stuff like he's the most important person in the world. And there's those people on social media, and there's the other guy on social media. Well, how long does it take dealing with the second guy I mentioned for the first guy to get totally discouraged and say, forget this, I'm just going to turn it over to the other guy who's just totally full of malarkey and lies, and he has the floor. Who wants to put up with that in this day and age? Especially if you're 70 plus.
But it's part of our culture now, and it's part of our fabric in not only being able to connect with people, but putting information out there. I think it can be a helpful tool.
The helpful thing,
but it also can help to put out the wrong information.
but the
too.
helpful thing is to put out the correct information, let it sit there, and then let the trolls go in and tear it to pieces. Okay, you can't. The facts are there. Nobody can refute them. People can only engage in insults and name calling about the facts, and then what kind of credibility does that give them? But that's what you have on social media.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed your time here on By the Numbers. Anything that you want to say in closing in regards to the budget process numbers, your experience as an elected and appointed official, and your thoughts moving forward?
For the budget process?
Just in general, anything that we haven't touched upon, or more or less anything you want to say in closing to put a nice bow on this package that we call By the Numbers, featuring Bruce Young.
Only thing is that I see that Whitman is going for an override.
An override and a debt exclusion.
It's almost a certainty that they are. And I believe part of that override is probably going to involve the Whitman-Hanson Regional School District. I can't say for sure, but if they're talking about a $3 million deficit up there, which coincidentally almost looks like the same number that the two towns voted on 2 years ago, the temptation is that if Whitman starts talking override, then Hanson could get drawn into the override. Because the best way to pass an override is not to have one town go down the road. Those people in the town saying, well, geez, Hanson's in the district too, but they don't need an override. So I don't want to see Hanson get sucked into an override that they don't need. On the other hand, if there's a legitimate reason for the override, that's why there's overrides, okay? But Hanson should go out of their way not to get sucked into an override that they don't need to get sucked into if they're in a financial situation that doesn't warrant it. That's all I'm saying.
I want to thank you very much for being a guest on this program. I hope you feel that we were able to touch on some important topics and conversations in regards to the municipal budget, the budget process.
Yes, I think we have, haven't we?
And your institutional knowledge of it.
Yes, and I tried to give you a little insight into things that other people don't know, that now they do know.
We'll have to get you back doing Hanson Unfiltered one of these times.
Yes, but we'll talk about that music program too, because that's a good
Your
one.
talking machines.
Right, yes.
Excellent. All right, there he is, Mr. Bruce Young has been our guest, and we hope that you feel that this particular program is providing you with insight when it comes to the finances, not only on the municipal level or town department or on the state level, but just how the process goes. And we're always looking for your input, whether it's valued guests or maybe questions to ask, or even just to kind of give your 2 cents on the program itself. info@WHCA.tv. And until next time, thank you for watching By the Numbers.